with a plan that makes sense. So that's sort of what we've done up to this point. And then Sharon, as a result of that meeting last week, Sharon asked if Sherry and I could sit in when she brings you all together. And unfortunately, Sherry had a conflict, so she's not here right now.
Okay, I just hit record as Amy was talking. I should have done that sooner, but then Judy and Hannah can see what we talk about here. So an idea that we discussed on Friday, I think it was Friday in our meeting, was in this research course, you actually had two options of research projects: an applied research project or an action research project. And all of you went with action research. Mm-hmm. I don't know how well you understand the difference between the two. There actually is a document in the course resources folder that gives kind of an overview. And real quick, I'm going to share my screen so I can show it to you. As soon as I figure out, share screen. Why does it have to get on the right screen? You know what I mean? Let's try this one. Can you see my screen? And are you looking at the list of folders in our resource?
Yes.
It's in my Blackboard page, okay? And then
yes.
if you go into action research or applied project, which one is right for me? And there's this very quick one-page little overview of the difference. And if you look right here, the difference between the two options can be summarized as follows. The action research option is the completion of original research and data collection. The applied project option applies theory to practice producing a product. And I believe, and I'm going to take it off of share screen now, I believe many of your projects could be modified into applied projects rather than the action research, just because of the lack of data. Now you have a choice here. You can still go forward with what you have so far and write up what you can. But an example would be, I think the one I used with Amy and Annette on Friday was Emily and Pollyann, who are doing similar projects with, you were doing the mindfulness and yoga, and you got through 5 of the 8 sessions with the students, and then all this came about, right? And now there's been how many weeks of lag time. Yeah. So you could technically go with the data you have, but you probably are wondering, how much can I get out of it? Because even if we were making some sort of impact with students, how much of that has been lost because of the situation we've all been in for 3 or 4 weeks? So a way to modify that into an applied project is, instead of using your data and actually measuring and trying to draw conclusions, you would simply create a product, which would be maybe your plan, your unit that you will implement in the future, hopefully the full thing, not like this time. So, and I think a lot of you could do that. Mickey, remind us real quick, Mickey, what is your project?
Mine is the classroom book a day.
Yep.
Where I'm doing vocabulary.
Yep. And now you're relying on parents at home, so they're not getting experience in the classroom with you. So instead, you could all use your same lit review, maybe add a little bit more to it, but then instead of designing an action research, you would design a product, meaning maybe this unit or this program that you could implement in the future. So an applied project, you can actually implement it while you're writing, or it could be the plan for it. Another way to understand the difference is if you go into the course resources folder, and there's a rubric for applied and there's a rubric for action, and in reading the rubric, you will see kind of the difference. And the main difference is you're no longer dependent upon your data to come up with a final paper. I feel like a lot of you would be writing out, I can't conclude much, or I don't know, you know what I mean? That's kind of where I was at with it. So I just want to kind of open that up. Please ask some questions. Tell me what you think of that. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, so I just had a question. Like Pollyanna and I, we purchased our mindfulness curriculum, and then we purchased a yoga curriculum that we had been doing. Is that something that we could still use for the applied, or does the applied research have to be things that we create on our own?
Well, it needs to be a product of your own, but it can certainly, I think like anything, you can reference other sources in it or use other materials as long as they're cited properly. Amy and Annette, maybe you would come in on that. that make sense?
Yeah. Yep, that's correct. You wouldn't be able to use those as your end product, but those could be supporting documents, or in that case, projects that would support your work moving forward.
Okay,
Does that make some sense? You don't want to build beyond somebody else's product.
sure.
Okay. So in this applied project, then you would need a formal unit plan. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yep, it would be a plan for the project or the program you would implement in the future.
Right. And so that potentially could be quite large. And for me specifically, doing Classroom Book a Day, would it be necessary to list the specific books?
You mean the books that you would use for your book a days?
Yeah, to incorporate that into the plan? Or could I just say, you know, a picture book daily?
Well,
I think at this point it would be, so the more robust your project is, the better, right? So I think that if you have a bibliography for, you know, a teacher that might use this plan, your book a day plan. So maybe I can give you some examples of what students have done in the past, if that might be helpful for their applied project. We've had students create classroom management handbooks. We've had students create websites for teachers that have been quite robust in thinking about an idea that they would want to implement. For whatever reason, they found themselves either not in a classroom right now, or in another, in another setting, or were unable to implement. And so, there's lots of different ways. We've had discipline handbooks made for districts, for example. We had a student a couple of years ago who they were refining their discipline policy, and her product was a actual handbook that the district actually ended up adopting. So think about it in a comprehensive way. What is something that you could hand off to a practitioner and they could implement it? Because remember, the research is in an essence you should be able to hand it to somebody, and they should be able to go through your steps and reproduce your research, right? So in this case, it's actually a product, so they can actually put it into practice. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Rebecca.
Yeah, I guess I don't know how that would look for me. My product or my research is like how using Wonder scripted curriculum for the first time, how it kind of compares to like some of the best practices that are a little bit more common and well known. And I've just been, as the week's been going on, comparing what their Wonders is telling me what to do versus what other people have suggested to do, and they're definitely not lining up. So like, how would I feel like I could keep going and doing the action research, but I mean, really, at this point, my students are not learning writing from me. They're, they're with their families, obviously. So how would that look as an applied project?
So basically what she was doing was her district adopted this Wonders curriculum, and it was basically prescribed hook, line, and sinker, right, Rebecca? Like, you don't deviate from it. And
Yeah.
she had concerns about that. What was that?
Oh, and we didn't get any training for it either. It was just kind of dropped in our lap, and here you go.
So she was trying to compare how children's writing would progress in a prescribed, rigid program like that without proper teacher training versus what she'd done in the past. And so she was collecting samples and journals and things, and she did have samples from previous years. And a lot of it would be her observation as well. Do you think, Rebecca, that you have enough data already? Because you really started collecting things in the fall.
Yeah, and I do have some new stuff. The kids have a journal that they've been writing in since the beginning of October. They took them home with them so they can continue the writing. I feel confident I can get a lot of them back, but the journal writing was more just of a separate piece that had nothing to do with Wonders. It was just kind of like a separate component for me to kind of like see visually how each child's writing progressed. And I do have different like writing samples that we've been collecting from Wonders too. Since the permission slips and stuff went out at the beginning of end of winter or whenever it was. But now, you know, obviously I don't have anything from like last month or so. So I'm really kind of limited on the data that I was able to collect as far as from the Wonders. If that makes sense.
Any thoughts on that, Amy? That's a harder one, I think.
Yeah, that one sounds a little trickier to me. Is there, you don't feel like you have enough data collected to this point? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
I mean, yeah, but at the same time, like how, you know, I guess 6 weeks, 4 weeks. And that's not even necessarily go through a week, like a prescribed week every week. We kind of stretched it into like 7 school days. So it's like we would kind of start on a Monday and then a Wednesday. So like really I only probably have like 4 samples from each student.
How many
in
students?
addition to other writings that we've collected, but only like 4 like actual prescribed writings.
How many students? What is your sample?
All 17 got permission, so.
And you have samples from all 17?
Like I said, I got about 4 from each student.
Perhaps you could do some sort of case studies with those students that you have the data with.
Okay, so what do you mean by that? Like,
So there's different ways to do this, but a case study methodology, it has bookends. Like you have to decide your case in this case will be your students. And you could look at the data that you have, analyze the data you have as you had planned, and describe it just as it's just this snapshot. This is the time that I had available to collect the data. And like in your limitations section, you can just say, go on. Oh, I think Amy wants to, oh, Sharon, okay. In your limitations section, you would include that, you know what, we've got a pandemic and that, you know, there, you have no control over that. But in your case study then, you might find some themes emerging. Okay, so it might be certain students, their scores or their, I don't know exactly what, you know, what you've been studying. So I don't know what your content is or what the focus.
It's writing, and she was keeping writing samples of how their writing progressed.
Okay, so then what you might find is different types of emerging findings for maybe 3 or 4 different kinds of ideas or understandings emerge from your the cases, the students that you have. And from there, you could make recommendations to your peers, you know, anything that would be helpful for your learning community. Could make recommendations for your peers, recommendations for folks throughout the district, you know, who's doing, those who are doing similar things, based on the themes that emerged from your data, from your students.
I have another idea, and I'll let Amy and Annette pipe in on this.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, Rebecca, that this curriculum was sort of just handed to teachers without any training, and you were expected to comply with it as it's planned, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What if she were to create and plan proper training for teachers to help them more successfully use the Wonders program based on her first year of implementing it without any guidance?
That's a great idea, but that's a different study. That's a new study. So she would have to do a new IRB, and
Okay.
that's a different that's a great idea. That would be a great action research, applied project, but that's a different study. So there would need to be an amended, if not a new IRB. We do have two great faculty from School of Education that sit on the IRB committee, and I have been in constant communication with them about these issues and what is the IRB committee going to be doing in terms of whether or not our students may or may not have to make adjustments. So it could be something, Sharon, that you and Rebecca work together on, and we can send it to our reps, Judy and Matt, and see what their take on it. But I'm not in a position to be able to make the IRB call on that. That's a great idea, actually, but my first reaction when I was listening to you is that that's probably going to need to go through IRB. Now, that doesn't mean that's a bad thing. It could be where that's an expedited review, right? Which means our School of Ed faculty reps read it and give their blessing to it. So, I'll let you and Rebecca kind of decide that.
Okay, well, we'll talk separately, but I'm guessing the IRB for applied is not quite as difficult as for the action, because you're not using people's data. Was that true?
It can be, not always. Sometimes you are using people's data. You're just producing something differently. And most, a lot of times our IRBs go through expedited review anyway. So.
All right. So Rebecca and I will talk on those ideas. Anybody else who wanted to pipe in on the applied versus action?
Emily and I were kind of thinking about if we could do, so ours were yoga and mindfulness interventions. Could we do a student journal? So we create a product that's the student journal for daily interventions for yoga, mindfulness, and then like a teacher instruction on how to implement that in the classroom. And based on our research showing that this could be a positive intervention.
So it still include the sessions that you did with the students?
I think, well, because we're doing journaling kind of separately or during those, but it wasn't part of the products that we purchased to use. So we could make something for the students that are similar to those journals that the kids were using. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I think so. If I understand that you would still like design a unit of study with these lessons, but you have this also, what you would create yourselves would be the product of the journal that students would use to reflect and show progress.
Yeah.
I think that sounds good.
Would that be a separate IRB thing because it's a little different?
And that's
so. Not knowing what your original IRB looked like, I think maybe in some of these cases, Sharon, you might need to pull them and just put like new, what any kind of modifications, and we'll send those to Matt and Judy and let them determine whether or not. So it sounds like, Pollyanna, if I'm hearing you correctly, I love the idea of yoga and mindfulness with my nephew does it, and it's very effective with him in school. But so if I'm hearing you correctly, you already were collecting journal data from the students participating, right?
Yep, we had 5 weeks and our whole program was supposed to be 8 weeks. So
Okay.
we're only 3 weeks short.
Yeah, and that's not, I mean, if you feel like you have enough to, I mean, cutting out 3 weeks of an 8 week, I think is reasonable. It's not the amount of time that you had hoped, but, given the situation that we're in, I can't, I mean, it's not anybody's fault that school's closed and you're in this place right now. But I think if you want to do something more with the journals, I think that's a great idea. But Sharon, I would definitely package it and then let's run it by Matt and Judy.
Okay. I don't think there'd be much problem with that. It's not.
No, I don't. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'm sorry, I have to go because I have a class in a few minutes.
Okay,
So,
I'll touch base with you,
all right.
then, okay?
yeah,
Bye,
we'll touch.
Rhonda.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Hi.
Good luck.
I have a question. I have to be honest, my brain has turned to mush. You guys up in Minnesota are probably 2 weeks ahead of us as far as implementing this e-learning. and I'm really struggling. But with this, if we went with the applied research, how does that look as far as due dates and when this all has to be done and presented?
That's a good question. That was something else I wanted to bring up, was the due dates.
You have 7 years from the time you started our program. Just to keep us in compliance with the Higher Learning Commission.
You might have a sooner due date, Mickey,
Right.
in your head.
Yeah, now having said that, please don't take 7 years to finish.
But the faculty, we discussed putting off presentations till July, and they would be Zoom. They wouldn't be in person like we'd originally planned at the college, right? Would July seem like a date far enough out for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And as far as the chapter due dates, I mean, that can be individualized for whatever you need between now and July. They're mainly there to keep you from putting it off till the end.
Right.
Yeah, due dates, I think at this point are quite flexible. I know that as a program, as MED faculty, we are just really trying to, exercise the rubber band mindset, being flexible, having consistency, but also knowing that, this is not a situation where, we are going to expect people to, have this rigidity, even for our own self. I mean, our lives are turned upside down along with everybody else's. So,
Sure.
we are trying to be as graceful and patient with everyone as we possibly can. But I would echo what Sharon's saying. That's really up to the faculty member. That's not, I don't have any actual authority whatsoever in this course. Sharon is the faculty member. I mean, I'm here to offer support. But yeah, I think in terms of a program, we'll be scheduling those, presentations later in, like midsummer, offering a couple options. May is not, really realistic for people. That just isn't realistic. And so we want to be mindful of that and have opportunities, probably offer a couple opportunities for people this summer so that, you can work within those due dates.
Thank you. Okay.
Anybody else have questions?
When would you need our decision on this?
Why don't each of you reach out to me separately via email and just kind of tell me what your plan sort of is, and maybe we can either talk on the phone or in a separate Zoom and sometime in the next week.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
that sounds good.
Okay. I thank you all for being available at this time. It was easier to do, I think, with the group to get started, and then we'll figure it out individually from here.
Thank you for taking the time to do this. I appreciate it.
No problem. Stay healthy.
Sharon, don't hesitate to, send emails if there's questions. The only real sticking point would be IRB, and that's if there's going to be a completely different, study happening. So.
Yeah, sounds
Okay.
good. All right.
Take good
Thanks,
care,
everybody.
everybody. Be
Thank
healthy.
you.
Happy Easter.
Bye now.
Stay well, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much.